The music in the grand hall suddenly stopped. Beneath the shimmering golden lights, Clara Monroe entered her ivory silk gown, brushing lightly across the wooden floor. But no one was looking at the dress. Every eye fixed on her face where one eye was swollen and bruised and a faint trace of dried blood still marked her cheek. Whispers spread through the birthday banquet. A few wine glasses froze mid-air. Her only son Daniel rose from the main table, his voice clear and cutting through the heavy silence. "It was my wife who taught my mother a lesson about respecting others." Beside him, Vanessa smiled faintly, her dark red lips curving like the edge of a blade. The air exploded without a sound. Somewhere, a guest dropped a fork, and the metallic clang rang out cold and sharp. Clara stood still, her hands trembling slightly. Every muscle in her face tightened, and her eyes didn't look at Daniel but through him, as though she were staring at a stranger wearing her son's face. Just as she was about to speak, another man's voice came from behind her. Daniel. The voice was deep and steady, like a hammer striking down. "You just made your father ashamed." Uncle Reggie Clara's younger brother stepped out from the crowd. His silver hair gleamed, his eyes fierce as steel. Vanessa froze and Daniel blinked, suddenly unsure of himself. The room fell utterly silent. The only sound, a faint jazz tune, still playing from a half-muted speaker. From that moment, Clara knew everything had passed the limit of endurance. She turned to face the hundreds of onlookers, friends, neighbors, relatives, all staring at her. That humiliation wasn't just a slap. It was the consequence of months and years of silence, of letting others walk over her dignity. And the story began years earlier during a blazing summer in Charleston, when her riverside home was still filled with laughter. 3 years ago, her husband Jonathan Monroe had died suddenly from a stroke. He was the man who had built that house with her from the sandy soil by the Ashley River, each brick bearing the imprint of their shared labor. After the funeral, Clara lived alone in the home full of memories. Daniel, then 36, offered to stay with her. "I don't want you to be lonely, Mom," he said gently. Clara smiled, thanking God that at least she still had a devoted son. The spring mornings passed peacefully. Mother and son made cinnamon tea together, sitting by the window overlooking the glittering river. Daniel told stories about his work at the architecture firm, and Clara shared memories from her years as a teacher. They had dinners together, watched old movies, sometimes laughed until tears came. In Clara's heart, everything still felt as it had when Jonathan was alive, until Vanessa Harper appeared. Daniel met her at an architecture conference. She was the event coordinator, beautiful, confident, with sleek black hair and a smile bright as the Charleston sun. "I think you'll like her, Mom," Daniel had said. But from the very first moment Clara saw Vanessa, she sensed something unsettling. The girl's hug was cool, measured to the second. Her gaze drifted across the living room, pausing at each painting, each ornament, as if appraising their worth rather than admiring them. During dinner, Clara served grilled red snapper with Lemon Jonathan's favorite dish. Vanessa ate little lightly, tapping her fork against the plate. "It's interesting," she said softly, "but I rarely eat oily food. Working in events, one has to stay in shape, you understand." Daniel laughed. Clara laughed too, though her smile carried a sting. After the meal, Vanessa complimented the house, calling it charmingly classic, then added a remark Clara would never forget. But if you painted the walls in lighter tones, the light would reflect better for photos. Daniel nodded in agreement. Clara sat silently, fingers tightening around her teacup. That girl wasn't just a guest. She was testing boundaries. 6 months later, Daniel married Vanessa in a lavish riverside ceremony. Clara was hardly involved in the planning. Vanessa had said, "You just need to attend Mom. I've hired professional event organizers." During the wedding, when Daniel and Vanessa exchanged rings, Clara saw happiness in her son's eyes and a glint of pride she had never seen before. When they returned from their honeymoon, Vanessa said, "Mom will stay here just a few months until we find a house." Clara agreed, never imagining that a few months would stretch into forever. Day by day, the house changed. The silk curtains Jonathan had chosen were replaced with cold gray ones. The old sofa was swapped for a modern design. "It makes the space feel larger," Vanessa explained sweetly. Daniel supported her, always telling his mother, "You just need to adapt a little. Mom times have changed." One evening, Clara went downstairs to make tea and heard laughter from the living room. Vanessa was entertaining friends, their voices bright and carefree. When Clara entered the room, fell quiet. Vanessa simply said, "You must be tired. Mom, maybe go rest." Clara nodded and left the room that had once been the heart of her family's life. On the stairs, she stopped and looked down. Her son's hand rested gently on his wife's back as he smiled tenderly at her. In that instant, Clara understood that a mother's place in her son's world had quietly been pushed beyond the living room door. That night, she opened the drawer of her vanity and took out Jonathan's old will. His handwriting was still clear. "All assets, including the Riverside house, belong solely to my wife, Clara Monroe, for the remainder of her life." She folded the paper and placed it back in the wooden box, whispering, "You see, Jonathan, they're turning our home into a stage." Downstairs, the laughter still echoed. Clara closed her door and sat on the edge of her bed. Inside her, the storm had begun. Early the next morning, the Charleston sunlight streamed through the window, casting shimmering patterns across the old floral rug. Clara rose early, as she always had during her 30 years of teaching. She brewed a pot of cinnamon tea, the familiar scent filling the quiet kitchen. When footsteps echoed down the hall, she looked up, hoping to see Daniel, her son, who used to greet her every morning with a smile. But it was Vanessa who appeared instead, her hair tied high, wearing a thin white robe, a phone in one hand and a cup of black coffee in the other. "Good morning, Mother," she said without looking up. "Do you make this every day? The cinnamon is a bit strong, not great for open spaces. You should try lavender oil. It's more contemporary." The comment was light, but it cut deep. Clara only smiled faintly and poured more hot water into her cup. Since Vanessa had moved in, the house that once felt like home had turned into a showroom for strangers. Every piece of old furniture had been replaced with something sleek and soulless. Even the kitchen no longer seemed to recognize her touch. Daniel came down soon after, dressed neatly for work. "Morning, Mom," he said, giving her a brief kiss on the cheek. "Vanessa's having some friends over tonight." "You don't mind, do you?" Clara's voice was soft. "I only wish for a chance to have dinner with you." Daniel smiled awkwardly, avoiding her eyes, and turned away. Vanessa placed a hand on his shoulder, her tone smooth. "You should rest, Mother. We'll take care of everything." Clara quietly gathered her teacup and went upstairs. On the landing, she paused before the family photo wall. The wedding portrait of Daniel and Vanessa now hung where her own wedding photo with Jonathan once had. Their bright new smiles had pushed her old memories into the corner. Her chest ached as she stood there, feeling like a guest in her own home. Days slipped by and Clara became a shadow in the house she had built. Every morning began with the sharp click of Vanessa's heels and the overpowering scent of expensive perfume filling the halls. Every evening ended with laughter from the living room, muffled by music and the clinking of glasses. When she entered the room, the conversation would fall silent, replaced by polite smiles and hollow words. She answered them with the same grace she'd taught her students, dignity even in humiliation, but her heart was breaking piece by piece. One Saturday night after a party ended, she came downstairs to clean up. The floor was littered with broken glass and stained napkins. Daniel was packing up speakers while Vanessa fixed her hair in the reflection of the window. "Let me help," Clara said gently. Vanessa turned her voice coldly pleasant. "No need, Mother. That's what the cleaning staff is for. You should really rest. Next time, I'll just have them come earlier." The words cleaning staff echoed in Clara's mind like a slap. Still, she said nothing, only bent down to collect the empty glasses. Daniel looked at her lips, parted as if to speak, but stayed silent. Later, when they had gone upstairs, Vanessa's final words lingered in the air. "Old people shouldn't meddle in everything. It's not attractive." Clara carried that sentence into the night like a wound. The next morning, she walked into the garden behind the house, the last place untouched by Vanessa's taste. The lavender beds Jonathan had planted still grew strong, and the brick path he'd laid by hand was perfectly straight. She sat on the wooden bench and breathed deeply, trying to steady her heart. From a distance, she saw Daniel and Vanessa strolling together, laughing softly. Vanessa turned her head, her eyes meeting Clara's for a moment, cold, assessing, almost triumphant. Clara lowered her gaze, her hands tightening until her nails pressed into her palms. That night, sleep would not come. The ticking clock on the wall marked every heavy second. She rose, opened her drawer, and took out the small wooden box where she kept Jonathan's will. His handwriting was still firm and clear. "This house belongs entirely to my wife, Clara Monroe, protected for her lifetime." Clara smiled faintly through tears. Jonathan had understood people, especially her. He had known how easily kindness could be mistaken for weakness. The next day, Vanessa brought in a young interior designer. "We're just refreshing the space, Mother," she explained brightly. The man spread out blueprints on the dining table. Clara leaned over and saw that the wall holding Jonathan's portrait was marked for removal. "You're taking down this wall?" she asked. Vanessa smiled. "It will open up the light. That old painting makes the room feel heavy. We need freshness energy." Clara's tone was soft but steady. "Freshness doesn't mean forgetting the past, Vanessa." The young woman gave a polite laugh. "Of course not, Mother. I'm only making it livable." Clara turned away, her chest tight. That evening, Daniel came home late. She waited for him in the dim light of the living room, the rain pattering softly outside. When he entered, his face was drawn, his clothes damp. "Daniel," she said quietly, "you've changed." He looked down, exhausted. "Mom, I just want peace. Vanessa means well. She's trying to help you." Clara's voice trembled. "Help me or replace me." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Please don't start this again. I'm tired." He turned to leave, and the door closed behind him, leaving her in the flicker of the lamplight, surrounded by silence and the scent of rain. She looked around the room that once belonged to her and Jonathan. The air no longer smelled of cinnamon and warmth. It carried only perfume and coldness. She pressed a hand against her heart. Her pulse was steady now, slow but strong. Somewhere deep inside, the quiet woman she had been was beginning to awaken. The storm she had held back for so long was gathering, patient and unstoppable. This time, Clara Monroe would not remain silent. That morning, Charleston shimmered under golden sunlight, like honey. Yet inside the riverside house, the air was cold enough that Clara had to wrap a light shawl around her shoulders. She heard Vanessa's laughter in the living room, the faint clinking of crystal glasses, and then the younger woman's voice rang out clearly. "You know, Mother, I think we should replace all the curtains. The cream color looks outdated, not very minimalist." Daniel's voice followed hesitant. "If Mom likes it that way," Vanessa cut him off her tone, light but sharp. "Not Mom, me. I'm the one who has to live with it every day." Standing on the staircase, Clara felt each word pierce her heart like needles. This was the house she and Jonathan had chosen brick by brick, wall by wall, and now people called it old as if it were some cheap antique. Silently, she turned away and stepped into the garden. The river breeze tousled her silver hair as she sat on the wooden bench by the gravel path. The lavender bushes Jonathan had planted still released their soft fragrance, but peace no longer lived in her heart. A door opened. Vanessa stepped out, holding her phone, wearing a fitted white dress and walking with effortless confidence. "Oh, Mother, there you are," she said. "I'm talking to the painters. They'll be here this afternoon." Clara looked up. "Painters, yes." Vanessa replied cheerfully, "I'm planning to repaint the dining room. That jade green is so out of style." She smiled slightly, her gaze carrying a hint of challenge. "You agree, don't you?" Clara's answer came slow but firm. "No. That room's color was chosen by my husband himself. No one touches it." Vanessa froze for a second, then let out a soft, dismissive laugh. "Still living in the past, Mother. We need to move forward." Her words were colder than the river wind. Clara stood her eyes steady. "Moving forward doesn't mean erasing what built this family," she said, and walked back inside without looking back. That afternoon, Daniel came home early. Vanessa ran to greet him, her voice sweet. "Honey, your mother got upset again. I just wanted to make the house brighter." Daniel sighed. "Vanessa, she's been through enough. Don't push her." Vanessa crossed her arms, her expression hard as stone. "So you'd rather live in a museum?" When he didn't answer, she added softly, just loud enough for Clara standing on the stairs to hear, "One day, I'll make this house truly ours." Clara froze. She turned quietly and went back to her room, sitting down at the old wooden desk. In the glow of the setting sun, Jonathan's will lay open before her, its neat handwriting gleaming under her fingertips. This property belonged solely to Clara Monroe until her death or by her voluntary transfer. A faint smile curved her lips, not of joy, but of someone who had tasted every bitterness life could offer. "Voluntary," she murmured. "They'll learn that Clara Monroe never does anything voluntarily to lose what's hers." That evening, music drifted from the living room. Vanessa was hosting a small gathering for her colleagues. Daniel called upstairs, "Mom, come have some cake." Clara draped her shawl over her shoulders and descended. The golden light illuminated her gentle yet resolute face. As she appeared, Vanessa turned to her guests and said brightly, "This is my mother-in-law, the one who keeps everything in the house. Original." You can see how charmingly vintage it all is. Laughter rippled through the group. A middle-aged man joked, "Feels like a house from another century." Vanessa replied quickly, "Exactly. But don't worry, it won't be like this for long." The laughter grew louder. Daniel frowned slightly but said nothing. Clara kept her smile, though her hands under the table clenched tight. When the party ended, she began gathering glasses, but Vanessa waved a hand. "Leave them, Mother. The cleaners will come in the morning." Clara replied softly, "It's fine. I'm used to doing it myself." That night she sat alone in the kitchen. The clock neared midnight. She poured herself a cup of tea, her tired eyes gazing out the window. Rain sprinkled over the river, catching reflections of distant lights. From upstairs, she heard Vanessa's voice, low but clear. "Daniel, you have to understand, I can't live with your mother in this house forever. It's not a home, it's her museum." There was a long pause before Daniel spoke quietly. "Give me some time, please." Vanessa laughed softly. "Time's running out. Either she leaves or we do." The sound of the bedroom door closing fell like the end of a sentence. Clara sat still in the kitchen, her eyes closing as silent tears blended with the sound of rain. The next morning, she brought breakfast upstairs. Daniel sat at the desk, his shirt half buttoned. "You look tired," she said. He nodded, avoiding her gaze. "Vanessa says you've been busy." "Yes, work's been intense lately." Clara placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice warm. "Every big project needs a strong foundation. Don't let anyone pull you away from that." Daniel nodded faintly. "I know, Mom." But in his eyes she saw a deep confusion, the kind that comes from losing one's sense of right and wrong. That night when the house was asleep, Clara opened her window and looked down at the glittering river. In the moonlight, she saw her reflection, an old woman with silver hair and eyes that no longer trembled. She whispered, "Jonathan, I've kept my promise, but maybe it's time to remind them who owns this home." The river wind rose, carrying the scent of lavender and the salt of the sea, as if answering her from the past. Clara closed the window. In the pale light, her face was no longer gentle, but resolute, cold, and sharp, like a blade finally ready to be drawn. That afternoon, the golden light of sunset spilled across the riverside homes, painting ripples of shimmering amber over the water. Clara was watering the orchids Jonathan once planted when she heard Vanessa's laughter ring out from the living room, high and crisp, mingled with Daniel's voice. She stepped inside, intending to ask her son about dinner, but froze at the doorway. Two workers were standing on ladders taking down the cream-colored curtains Jonathan had chosen during their first trip to Europe together. "Stop," Clara's voice broke through sharply. The workers startled and froze. Vanessa turned her tone sweet but cold. "Mother, I thought you were still in the garden. Don't worry, the new curtains will suit the light better. Smoke gray, much more elegant." Clara walked closer, her voice rough but steady. "Those curtains were chosen by your father. They stay." Daniel stood between the two women, his face caught in confusion. "Vanessa just wants to help make the house feel more modern." "Mom, please don't misunderstand. Modern doesn't mean erasing everything," Clara said, her eyes blazing. Vanessa shrugged lightly, a smile that never reached her eyes. "I just think you should learn to let things go, Mother. We younger people have a different perspective." The words cut into Clara's pride like a soft, sharp blade. She turned away, but inside the memories of Jonathan and their life together splintered into pieces. That evening, music filled the house once again. Vanessa was hosting another small party, the chandelier light reflecting off the walls. Clara sat in her room listening to the bursts of laughter drifting up. She tried to read, but the words blurred on the page. Every time Vanessa's laughter rang out, her grip on the book tightened. Then she heard Daniel's voice faint through the music. Mom's probably asleep by now. A ripple of laughter followed. Someone asked, "Does the old lady live here full time?" Vanessa's teasing voice answered, "For now, but she'll soon have somewhere more suitable." Clara set the book down, her heart pounding. She stepped into the hallway and looked over the banister. Down below, Vanessa stood close to Daniel, one hand draped over his shoulder. Her cold eyes lifted toward the staircase where Clara stood. Their eyes met no words, just one glance, and Clara knew the battle had begun. The next morning, Daniel left early for work. Vanessa stayed home, seated in the kitchen with her laptop open, her voice crisp and businesslike on a phone call. "Yes, that's right, number 35 Riverside Drive. I'd like to schedule a real estate appraisal. It's an old house, but in excellent condition. Tomorrow would be perfect as early as possible." Clara stood by the door, hearing every word. When Vanessa hung up, Clara spoke calmly, her tone strangely even. "You're planning to sell this house." Vanessa flinched, then quickly regained composure. "Not exactly, Mother. We just want to know its current value. Maybe we'll invest in some renovations later." "This house doesn't belong to we," Clara said slowly. "It belongs to me." Vanessa smiled faintly, a small dismissive curve of her lips. "Paperwork is one thing, reality is another. You can't live here alone forever. Daniel and I need our own space to build a future." Clara replied softly, but each word carried steel. "A future cannot be built on taking what isn't yours." Vanessa stood her tone cool. "You should rest, Mother. I worry you're exhausting yourself holding on to things that are already gone." Then she walked out, leaving Clara alone at the table, her hand resting against the wood cold as iron. Night fell, and the river wind grew strong. Clara couldn't sleep. She opened her wooden box and took out a sealed envelope, the certified copy of Jonathan's will. Beside it were bank documents and financial papers under her name alone. In the amber glow of the lamp, she exhaled slowly. Jonathan had once said, "I've left enough for you to never fear anyone." But he had never taught her how to face betrayal from her own blood. Quietly, she gathered the documents into a leather pouch, locked it in her drawer, and gazed out into the night. The water shimmered under the moonlight, calm and silent, but within her, a storm was forming. The next morning, as Vanessa had arranged, the appraiser arrived. Clara answered the door, smiling politely. "Can I help you?" The young man hesitated. "I was hired to assess the value of this property." "By whom, Mrs. Vanessa Harper Monroe," he said. Clara nodded slightly. "Thank you, but I'm afraid you'll have to leave. The legal owner of this house is me. If you continue this work, I'll have to call my attorney." The appraiser stammered an apology and left quickly. Vanessa appeared on the staircase just as the door closed. Her face tightened. "Mother, what have you done?" Clara met her gaze, her voice low but unyielding. "I've protected my home." Vanessa let out a hollow laugh. "You can't stop what's coming," Clara replied. "Your future cannot be built on my ruin." That evening, Daniel came home, his face drawn and pale. "Vanessa says you embarrassed her," he said, avoiding her eyes. "She's only trying to make life better." Clara interrupted, her tone calm but cutting. "She wants to make it better by pushing me out of my own house." Daniel opened his mouth to argue, but the look in his mother's eyes stopped him. "My son," Clara said softly, "I've stayed silent because I believed you still knew right from wrong. But if you let someone teach me about respect, then you're no longer the boy I raised." Daniel lowered his head and said nothing. That night, the house fell into silence. Clara sat by the window, watching the city lights shimmer across the river. In that stillness, she understood what was coming, not just loss, but the fight to defend her dignity. And this time, she would not step back. That night, Clara woke suddenly to a faint noise downstairs. The clock hands pointed to midnight. She threw on her robe and quietly descended the staircase. A warm golden light spilled from the living room. Vanessa's voice came first low, and tense words tumbling quickly, as if she were trying to hold back anger. "Daniel, don't you see? We can't keep living like this with your mother. This house is too big for 3 people, and I'm exhausted from being watched all the time." Daniel's voice was soft or tired. "Keep your voice down. Mom's asleep." Vanessa let out a short, bitter laugh. "Asleep women like her never sleep. She hears everything, sees everything, and drives me insane." Silence stretched before Daniel finally murmured, "This is her house, Vanessa. I can't ask her to leave." Vanessa shook her head, her tone rising. "Not asking her to leave, just arranging things. There are better places for the elderly, places where they're cared for, surrounded by people their own age. We'll cover all the expenses. She'll be happier there." Daniel closed his eyes and was quiet for a long time. At last he sighed. "Let me think about it." Behind the door, Clara stood pressed against the wall, her heart pounding like a drum. Each of Vanessa's words struck her like nails driven deep into her chest. Better places for the elderly, that was how they spoke of her, like she was something outdated, a burden to be relocated. She stepped back, carefully avoiding any sound, then hurried upstairs and shut her door, her hands trembling. In the dark, she sank to the floor, clutching her chest. It wasn't a heart attack. It was the hollow ache of betrayal by her own blood. Hot tears rolled down her face as she looked toward the framed photograph of Jonathan on the dresser, his gentle smile, his warm eyes. "Do you see this, Jonathan?" she whispered through sobs. "Our son wants to drive me out of our home." The next morning, Clara rose with swollen eyes. She cooked breakfast as always, fried eggs, toast, black coffee. When Daniel came down, she placed the plate before him and said softly, "I want to talk." Daniel avoided her gaze. "Now's not a good time, Mom. I'm running late for work." Then tonight, she asked. "I've got plans tonight," he replied, already grabbing his briefcase. Clara's voice followed him, low and sad. "If you plan to throw someone away, at least have the decency to look them in the eye." He froze for a moment at the door, but still walked out without a word. That evening, Vanessa hosted a small gathering for her media colleagues. Clara hadn't wanted to attend, but courtesy compelled her. When she entered the living room, she felt every guest's eyes flick toward her curious, polite, but with an undertone of unease. Vanessa beamed. "Everyone. This is my mother-in-law, the one who's kept everything in this house exactly the same for decades. It's wonderful to live with a piece of history, isn't it?" Laughter rippled across the table, but beneath it, Clara heard the faint ring of mockery. She nodded faintly and stepped back toward the kitchen doorway. One of the younger women whispered, "It's rare for someone her age to still live with her kids." Vanessa's voice floated back light and measured. "Yes, but that's going to change soon." Daniel sat beside her, forcing a smile, his lips trembling. Clara saw it all, and in that moment the last shard of faith she had in her son began to crumble. When the guests were gone, Vanessa gathered the wine glasses, turning to Daniel. "You see, I told you, this house needs new energy, not old memories." Daniel set down his glass, his tone low. "Vanessa, don't push her too hard." She shrugged. "I'm just being honest. She lives like a ghost clinging to the past." Daniel sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Don't forget, she's my mother." Vanessa met his eyes. "And I'm your wife. One of us has to give way. You decide." The words struck like thunder. Daniel said nothing. Upstairs, Clara stood silently at the staircase, hearing every word. Late that night, she sat in her study, staring out over the river. In her hand was a letter Jonathan had written long ago, his handwriting slanted but strong. "Never let anyone take what's yours, Clara. Not even someone who bears the Monroe name." Her tears fell onto the page, blurring the ink like an old wound reopening. "Don't worry, Jonathan," she whispered. "I won't let them take anything. Not this house, not my dignity." The next morning, Vanessa proudly told her husband, "I've scheduled a meeting with a real estate consultant. They said this house could be worth nearly $1.5 million after renovations." Daniel's expression tightened. "Why are you bringing this up? Don't you see it's our chance to start fresh? We could buy our own home," she said eagerly. Daniel hesitated, but Mom Vanessa cut him off gently. "Your mother needs a smaller place. You can't expect her to live here forever. Be practical, Daniel." She placed a hand on his chest, her voice softening. "I know you love her, but sometimes love needs to be realistic." Daniel said nothing, his head lowered. Clara entered just then. Her eyes were calm but sharp as a blade. "If being realistic means throwing your mother out of her home, then go ahead," she said evenly. "But remember, the one who signs the deed will have to be me." Silence filled the room. The ticking clock was the only sound. That evening, Clara went to see Reggie. He looked surprised to see his sister carrying a folder of documents. "Clara, what's going on?" She sat down, her tone composed. "Brother, do you still have contact with Jonathan's old lawyer?" "Of course." "Mr. Grant." "Good. Call him for me." I need to make sure every clause in the will is still valid." Reggie studied her face and saw that the softness once in her eyes had hardened into steel. "They've gone too far, haven't they?" Clara nodded slightly. "If they want a war, I won't hide." Outside, lightning flashed over the Charleston sky. The river wind roared, carrying the tang of salt and lavender through the air. In that blue-violet glow, Clara's face seemed carved from stone, unyielding, proud, and ready for the storm to come. That morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, scattering across the large mirror in the living room and reflecting hundreds of shimmering rays. Clara stood on the staircase, gazing down at the brightly decorated space. Silver balloons, ribbons, scented candles. Everything was perfect, too perfect for someone about to be betrayed by her own family. Today was her 68th birthday, and the person who had organized it all was none other than Vanessa. "Happy birthday, Mother." Vanessa greeted when she saw Clara, descending her voice, sweet as honey but her eyes cold as steel. "I hope you'll love the party. I invited the entire family and all your old friends. Everyone's so excited to see you." Clara forced a gentle smile. "Thank you, Vanessa. I only wish for a peaceful day." "Of course," Vanessa replied, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And perhaps today is also the perfect time for you to talk about the future." The words were light as air, yet in Clara's heart they fell like a stone. When Vanessa walked away, Clara looked around the house. Everything felt foreign, from the new crystal glasses and velvet chairs to the framed wedding portrait of Daniel and Vanessa hanging in the center of the room, replacing the spot where Jonathan's portrait had once been. She stepped closer, touching the corner of the frame. "Jonathan?" She whispered softly, "What would you say if you saw this?" By noon, the guests began to arrive. Daniel was busy greeting them, his hand never leaving his wife's. Reggie, Clara's younger brother, came early with a bouquet of soft lavender flowers. "Happy birthday, big sister," he said, his eyes searching hers. "Are you all right?" Clara nodded with a strained smile. "I'm fine. At least today there's still one family member I can count on." Reggie frowned but said nothing. When the clock struck 2, the celebration officially began. Gentle jazz filled the air and glasses clinked in toasts. Clara tried to blend in, exchanging polite words with old friends, but inside she felt unsteady, as if standing on thin ice. All eyes were drawn to Vanessa, the true hostess of the event, graceful, smiling, adjusting tablecloths, raising her glass, the perfect daughter-in-law. Midway through the afternoon, Clara went upstairs to retrieve the pearl necklace Jonathan had given her years ago. When she opened her jewelry box, her breath caught in her throat. The small wooden case that held her most treasured keepsakes was open, its contents scattered, and the pearl earrings were gone. Just then, Vanessa's voice echoed from the hallway. Looking for something, Mother Clara turned to see her daughter-in-law leaning against the doorway, the pearl earrings gleaming in her hand. "Those belong to me," Clara said, her voice hoarse. "I was just admiring them," Vanessa replied coolly. "They're lovely. I bet they'd sell for a good price. You never wear them anyway." Clara took a step forward. "Put them down." Vanessa smiled, her gaze dripping with mockery. "Do you really think you still control what happens in this house? Daniel and I live here now." The words hit like a spark to dry tinder. Clara's voice trembled with restrained fury. "This house is in my name. Jonathan left it to me, not to you, and I won't let anyone take it away." Vanessa laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "You really think that piece of paper will protect you forever? Daniel's your son. He'll inherit everything. And you," she paused, locking eyes with Clara, "will be gone soon enough." In that instant, everything shattered. Clara lunged forward, snatching the jewelry box from Vanessa's hand. Vanessa didn't back away. She shoved her hard instead. Clara lost her balance, slipped and fell, hitting her head against the corner of the vanity. Pain exploded through her skull, her vision blurring. She saw blood spreading across the floor and heard Vanessa's cold voice above her. "You fell, remember that." Then the door slammed shut. Clara didn't know how long she lay there before she managed to push herself up. When she looked in the mirror, her cheek was swollen and bruised, a thin streak of blood running down her neck. Her hands trembling, she dabbed at it with a damp cloth and brushed on a thin layer of powder to hide the wound. The woman staring back from the mirror was no longer gentle. She was someone pushed to the edge. Downstairs, the music still played. Clara walked down the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. The moment she appeared, the laughter and chatter stopped. The room fell silent. Guests turned toward her, eyes wide with shock as the bruise on her face came into view. Daniel set his glass down, stood, and instead of rushing to her, said clearly, almost proudly, "My wife was only teaching my mother a lesson about respect." The air froze. A few guests gasped. Vanessa stood beside him, a cruel smile flickering on her lips. Clara stood still, her heart heavy as stone. Then a familiar voice rang out, firm and thunderous. "Daniel Monroe, you've just shamed your father." Reggie stepped forward, his eyes blazing. A man who lets his wife strike his mother and then boasts about it, that man is not Jonathan Monroe's son. Murmurs swept through the room. A woman covered her mouth. A man set down his drink. Daniel's face went pale while Vanessa gripped his arm tightly. Clara looked around at the faces of old friends, the pity in their eyes. She didn't cry. She stood tall, placing a hand on her chest, and spoke in a calm, steady voice that chilled the room. "If this is how you wish to celebrate my birthday, then thank you." No one dared to speak. Only the faint sound of jazz lingered in the air, weak and ghostly like the fading breath of a dying soul. But in Clara's eyes, a flame had just been lit, the kind of flame that would burn through every lie that had poisoned this house. No one in the room dared to speak after Reggie's words. The music stopped, and only the sound of the wind moving through the window remained. Vanessa bit her lip, forcing a smile, trying to maintain her composure. "Uncle Reggie, you must have misunderstood." I slipped, that's all she said, but her voice trembled. Reggie didn't respond. He stepped forward to help Clara. "You're hurt. Go upstairs and rest," he said softly. Clara nodded, but Daniel moved quickly, blocking their path. "I can take care of my mother. This is a family matter. You shouldn't get involved." Reggie turned his gaze sharp as glass. "Precisely because it's a family matter, I have to get involved." The two men stared at each other in heavy silence. Then Reggie guided his sister upstairs, leaving Daniel standing motionless like a statue. In her room, Clara sat before the mirror. The bruise had spread down her cheek, burning like fire. Reggie pressed a cold pack gently to her face, his tone lower and firm. "Sister, you have to do something. You can't let them continue." Clara met his eyes, weary but unbroken. "Do you think I'll stay silent?" "No. But first I need to let them show their true faces." Reggie understood and said nothing. Downstairs, voices rose again. Daniel's angry tone echoed through the walls. "Why did you have to make a scene in front of everyone?" Vanessa snapped back. "Because your mother's lying. I didn't do anything wrong. Wrong or not, everyone saw what happened. You think you can hide it?" Daniel shot back. Vanessa went quiet, then burst into tears, sharp, piercing sobs that cut through the air like knives. Later that night, after all the guests had gone, Reggie brought up a box of medicine. "Take a painkiller," he said. "Tomorrow morning, I'll call Mr. Grant, Jonathan's old lawyer." Clara nodded and placed her hand gently on her brother's arm. "Thank you. If you hadn't been there, I might have fallen apart." He held her hand tightly, his voice steady. "No one has the right to humiliate you in your own home, not even your own son." Clara lowered her head, a tear falling onto his hand. "Daniel isn't the boy you used to know. He's being led astray. But maybe you're right. Maybe he needs to see the truth for himself." The next morning, Reggie left early. Clara moved slowly but with purpose as she made tea in the kitchen. When she was setting the kettle down, Daniel entered, his face drawn and pale. "Mother," he said quietly, "I'm sorry about last night." Clara didn't turn around. "Sorry for what?" "For letting your wife strike me, or for standing before everyone and saying I deserved it." Daniel said nothing. Vanessa said, "Enough." Clara cut him off. "Stop making excuses for others. If you really want to know what happened, look me in the eye and ask." He did, and what he saw wasn't the fragile woman he remembered, but a mother holding on to every ounce of dignity she had left. "I just want peace," he murmured weakly. "There can be no peace," Clara replied, "when one side uses its fists." When he left, Clara sat down, her hands trembling but her eyes burning bright. She picked up her phone and called Reggie. "Brother, it's time. Call Mr. Grant. I want to see him today." That afternoon, Mr. Grant arrived carrying an old leather briefcase. His hair was grayer now, but his voice was still calm and sharp. "Clara," he said. After listening to her story, Jonathan anticipated this possibility. He added a special clause in his will to protect you. Clara's brows furrowed. "A clause?" "Yes," Mr. Grant explained. "If you are ever coerced or pressured to leave the house, Daniel's inheritance rights will be revoked entirely. The estate will automatically transfer to the charitable foundation Jonathan established." Clara went still, tears blurring her vision. He thought that far ahead, Mr. Grant gave a faint, sad smile. "Jonathan always believed you'd stay true to yourself, but he also knew that kindness sometimes needs the protection of law." Clara clasped her hands together, feeling strength flow back into her veins. "Thank you, Mr. Grant. Now I know exactly what I must do." When he left, she stood by the window, watching the sunlight shimmer across the river. In the wind, she could almost hear Jonathan's voice whisper, "You were never weak, Clara." She smiled faintly, touching the bruise that still marked her cheek. "You're right, my love. I won't be weak again." Far in the distance, Daniel stood alone on the bridge, his head bowed, and in the red-orange glow of dusk, Clara Monroe, the mother who had been humiliated before her own son, was ready to begin her counterattack. That evening, the Charleston sky was a deep shade of blue, and the river wind swept fiercely through the lavender bushes, trembling outside the porch. Inside the house, the air was thick, ready to explode. Clara sat at the dining table, Reggie beside her, and across from them were Daniel and Vanessa. Mr. Grant, the family lawyer, stood near the fireplace holding a stack of documents. Clara had invited him not for a friendly visit, but to put an end to all the lies. Mr. Grant began, his voice calm but commanding. "I was called here to clarify the legal ownership of this house." Vanessa crossed her arms, feigning composure. "There's no need to waste your time. Everyone knows this house is under my mother-in-law's name, but eventually it will belong to Daniel. Isn't that right?" Mr. Grant smiled faintly and pulled out an aged yellow document. "Not exactly. Mr. Jonathan Monroe included a special clause in his will." Daniel frowned. What clause? Mr. Grant read slowly, each word striking the air like a bell. "If Mrs. Clara Monroe is ever coerced, manipulated, or threatened into leaving her home, her son's inheritance rights will be revoked entirely, and all assets will be transferred to the Harbor Hope Foundation Charity Fund." The room fell silent. Vanessa's face went pale, and Daniel froze like a statue. "That's impossible," Vanessa burst out. "This is just a bluff." Mr. Grant lifted his gaze, his eyes sharp as glass. I personally notarized this clause. It is completely legal. Clara looked straight at Vanessa, her voice steady but heavy as lead. Did you think I didn't know what you were doing? You arranged for a property appraisal, and you even researched how to have me declared legally incompetent. I know everything. Vanessa leapt to her feet, stepping back. You're lying. Reggie slammed his hand on the table. Enough, we have proof. You left your phone number on the appraisal request. Daniel turned to his wife, his voice cracking. Vanessa, tell me the truth. Is it true? She forced a smile, but her voice trembled. I only wanted to secure our future. By destroying my mother, Daniel's eyes filled with tears. Vanessa shouted, her voice sharp and desperate. She hates me. She's always treated me like an outsider. Clara sat quietly, saying nothing. Her anger had passed, replaced by the calm, aching sorrow of a woman who had loved too deeply and been betrayed too completely. Mr. Grant closed the folder and spoke evenly. Mrs. Monroe has full authority over who remains in this house. If she feels threatened, I will file immediate legal protection on her behalf. Reggie leaned forward, his voice low. Clara, it's time you speak. Clara rose slowly. Her voice was calm, yet it filled the room with quiet power. Vanessa Harper Monroe, you will leave my house tonight. Daniel, you may stay, but if you choose to stand with her, then both of you may go. Vanessa's mouth fell open as she looked to her husband for support, but Daniel only bowed his head, tears splashing onto the floor. Mother's right. I was wrong. He turned to Vanessa, his voice rough and hollow. You need to go. Vanessa's eyes darted around the room, sharp with rage. You'll regret this, she hissed. No one throws me away. Then she grabbed her purse, stormed out, and slammed the door so hard the walls shook. Reggie placed a hand on his sister's shoulder. It's over, Clara. But she gazed out the window where the moonlight spilled over the trembling lavender blooms. Not yet, Reggie, she whispered. The storm has only just begun. But at least tonight this house can finally breathe again. The house sank into silence after the door slammed shut. The sound of Vanessa's car engine echoed in the yard, then faded into the distance, leaving only the whisper of the river wind and the chill seeping through the window frame. Daniel sat frozen in his chair, head-bowed, hands covering his face. Mother, what have I done? His voice cracked like that of a lost child. Clara looked at her son, her heart aching yet filled with a strange, tender pity. You're paying the price for trusting the wrong person. Daniel, she said softly, but realizing it now is still better than never. Reggie stood pouring tea for them both. Mr. Grant had already left, leaving behind a room heavy with the weight of truth just revealed. Clara, you need to rest, Reggie said quietly. But Clara shook her head. She looked at her son, the man who had once been her greatest pride, now slumped, eyes red, shoulders trembling. You let yourself be blinded, Daniel. But I still believe that somewhere inside you there's a piece of your father, the honest, kind man he was. Daniel buried his face in his hands, his breath breaking into quiet sobs. The next morning, sunlight danced on the rippling surface of the river. Clara awoke feeling drained but strangely clear-minded. When she went downstairs, she found Daniel sitting at the kitchen table, dark circles under his eyes. He looked up and whispered, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what I've done, about Father, about you. I'm ashamed. Clara poured tea and sat across from him. What will you do next? Daniel hesitated, then said, Vanessa's been messaging me all night. She says she'll sue. Says she'll smear our family name online, but I don't know how to respond. Clara turned to the window, the morning light catching her calm expression. If she wants to fight, let her fight with her own shadow. You don't need to be part of it. I'll handle it." Daniel looked surprised. "You?" She nodded slowly. "I've spent my whole life learning to yield. Now I understand yielding to the worthy is compassion, but yielding to the greedy is self-destruction." Later that day, Reggie called. Vanessa just hired her own lawyer. She's demanding compensation for defamation and a divorce settlement, but Grant says she doesn't have a single legal leg to stand on. Clara sighed. Money isn't what she wants. She wants attention, and she wants to drag Daniel down with her. There was a long pause before Reggie asked, "You're still letting Daniel stay with you?" Clara looked toward her son, who was quietly washing teacups at the sink. "Yes. He needs to learn how to live again in the very house he once betrayed. Leaving would be easy. Staying, that's harder." That afternoon, Daniel walked along the riverbank where he used to play with his father as a child. When he returned, he paused at the kitchen door where his mother was cooking. The smell of chicken stew filled the air, stirring old memories. "Mother," he said quietly, "can you forgive me?" Clara didn't turn around. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting Daniel, but perhaps when you've learned to bow your head, I have no reason left to hate. He stepped closer, placing a trembling hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She nodded slightly, saying nothing more. That evening, they shared a meal together for the first time in months. Reggie joined them, bringing news from the lawyer. Vanessa is demanding $50,000 to agree to an amicable divorce. If not, she threatens to go to the press. Daniel started to speak, alarmed, but Clara raised her hand. "Not a cent. She'll destroy herself. People who live by deceit always do." Night fell, and the wind rose again over the river. Clara stood by the window, watching the moonlight spill across the lavender garden. The flowers swayed gently, whispering secrets to the wind. She closed her eyes and heard Jonathan's voice in her mind. "You're stronger than you think, Clara." A single tear slid down her cheek, but this time it wasn't bitter. She murmured, "Yes, I understand now. Strength isn't in revenge. It's in no longer being afraid." Downstairs, Daniel sat alone at the dining table, a cup of cold tea before him. He looked up at the portrait of his father hanging on the wall, the eyes shining under the dim light. "I did wrong, but I'll make it right," he whispered. And in that riverside home, once filled with bitterness, a faint light flickered to life, fragile yet steadfast like a green shoot breaking through after a storm. The next morning, the Charleston sky was heavy and gray, hanging low over the river like a sheet of dull silk. Clara sat on the porch, her tea growing cold in her hands. She heard the sound of a car stopping at the gate, followed by a knock on the door. Reggie walked in his expression grave. "News," he said quietly. "Vanessa has filed a lawsuit. She's demanding compensation for defamation, claiming she was insulted and unlawfully expelled from the house." Clara only smiled faintly. She still doesn't understand. Mr. Grant has already prepared everything. No one can overturn Jonathan's will. Daniel went pale. "Mother, I didn't think she'd go this far." Clara looked at him calmly. "You knew Daniel. You just didn't believe she would dare." He lowered his head. "Let me talk to her. Maybe I can reason with her." "No," Clara interrupted firmly. "The closer you get, the more power you give her. Your love was once her weapon. Now let reason protect you." That afternoon, Mr. Grant arrived carrying a thick, neatly organized folder. "I filed the official response," he said. "Not only have we rejected her claims, but we've also filed a counterclaim for defamation." Reggie chuckled. "Good. Let's see what tricks she has left." But Clara didn't share his satisfaction. Inside, she felt no joy, only exhaustion. She had taught hundreds of students the meaning of compassion, yet now she found herself learning the harshest lesson about human nature. Late that night, Daniel received a message from Vanessa. "You'll pay for betraying me. I have proof you're using your mother to seize the estate." His hands shook as he threw the phone onto the table, his face drained of color. "Mother, she's threatening to ruin me publicly." Clara replied softly, "Let her talk. The more a liar speaks, the more she exposes herself." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden. "My son, sometimes the greatest punishment doesn't come from the courts, but from the silence of the one who once loved you." 2 days later, the local paper ran a headline, "Woman expelled from husband's home, accuses mother-in-law of emotional abuse." The article was filled with fabrications. A photo of Clara from her birthday party spread across the page with the caption, "Victim of a cruel mother." Daniel trembled with rage. "I can't stand this anymore." But Clara remained composed. Silence is the only way for them to reveal who they really are. Never forget, truth always finds its way. A few days later, Mr. Grant called with an update. "Good news, we've found solid evidence that Vanessa hired someone to alter photos and used fake accounts to spread false information." Daniel was stunned. "She actually did that," yes, Mr. Grant replied. "And that evidence will be more than enough to press charges against her." Clara smiled faintly, her voice steady. "Jonathan once said that lies are powerful only when people are afraid to speak the truth." A week later, a small hearing was held in court. Vanessa appeared in a black dress, her makeup flawless, feigning frailty. When the judge questioned her, she said tearfully, "I only wanted respect, but they treated me like an outcast." Then it was Mr. Grant's turn. He laid out the evidence, the property appraisal receipts, the text messages demanding money, and an audio recording of Vanessa's own voice saying, "All I need is that house. She'll be gone soon enough." The courtroom fell silent. Vanessa's face turned ashen, her lips trembling. The judge struck the gavel, his voice cold. "Mrs. Harper's complaint is dismissed. Her actions constitute defamation. I advise her to withdraw before this escalates further." Vanessa stood abruptly, her face flushing with shame, and stormed out of the courtroom. Daniel sat motionless, his fists clenched tight. Clara turned to him and said quietly, "You see, justice arrives even when revenge is unnecessary." As they stepped outside, the wind was soft, and the sky began to clear after the rain. Daniel walked beside his mother, silent for a long moment before whispering, "Mother, I don't deserve your kindness." Clara tightened her hand around his. "No one deserves forgiveness forever, Daniel. But those brave enough to make things right will earn it." They walked together under the gentle light, and for the first time in many months, Clara felt her heart as light as the river breeze. Time after the trial passed quietly, but for Clara, each day felt like being given a new life. The riverside house slowly returned to its old rhythm, peaceful, warm, and free from the echo of arrogant footsteps or hollow laughter filling its halls. Vanessa had vanished from their lives like a passing storm, leaving behind wreckage, not in the walls, but in their hearts. Daniel stayed silent and remorseful. He cleaned the living room and rehung Jonathan's old portrait. When the frame was back in its original place, Clara stood still for a long moment. Her husband's eyes in the picture seemed to smile kind and proud. "We've kept it, my love," she whispered softly. Daniel returned to work, but every evening he came home to have dinner with his mother. There was no wine now, no forced laughter, only the comforting smell of food, the sound of a knife against the cutting board, and the gentle flow of hesitant conversation. One night during dinner, Daniel spoke quietly. "Mom, I've started therapy. The doctor says I suffer from emotional dependency, that I was easily manipulated." Clara looked up with a tender smile. "Good. You've begun to understand yourself." Daniel nodded, his eyes glistening. I let someone control my trust, but my greatest mistake was letting her make me doubt you. In the weeks that followed, Clara found herself busy with something new. She opened a small art class in the old living room, teaching painting to older women from the neighborhood. Every afternoon, laughter mixed with the scent of paint filled the house. She felt happiness in a different way, simple, whole, and peaceful. One day, Daniel stepped quietly into the middle of a class, sitting silently in the corner, watching his mother smile as she taught. After the students left, he said softly, "Mother, I've never seen you so strong." Clara replied, "Strength comes when fear ends. I used to fear loneliness, losing you, being forgotten. But in the end, I learned that as long as we keep our dignity, we never truly lose anything." One evening, Reggie stopped by with good news. Vanessa has withdrawn her appeal and left the state. Grant said she signed the divorce papers. It's all finalized. Clara exhaled in relief. So it's over. Reggie placed a hand on her shoulder. Not quite. There's still one thing left for you to do. Forgive yourself. Clara smiled faintly, her eyes softening. You're right. Maybe I've been too hard, but if I hadn't been, I would have lost everything. That night, Clara sat quietly on the porch with a cup of tea. Daniel joined her, carrying a thin blanket. I miss Father, he said, staring into the distance. If he were still here, he wouldn't be proud of me. Clara shook her head. No, your father would understand. What makes a person worthy of pride isn't never being wrong, but having the courage to stand up once they see their mistake. Daniel smiled weakly. They sat side by side without speaking. Only the sound of the river against the shore and the faint scent of lavender filled the air like forgiveness, drifting softly from the past to embrace them both. 2 years later, Charleston had returned to its calm beauty. Clara Monroe's riverside house had been repainted its familiar cream color, and the lavender garden still bloomed a deep purple whenever the wind blew. She lived slowly now, teaching a few art classes for women in the neighborhood. Every morning she brewed tea and sat by the window facing the river reading. All the pain, once so heavy, had faded into the distance, leaving behind only peace and quiet strength. Daniel had completely changed. He left his high-paying job at the big company and opened a small architecture studio, working diligently and living simply. Every week he returned home for dinner with his mother. There were no more tense conversations, only the sound of the knife against the cutting board and the scent of chicken stew filling the kitchen. They spoke little, but their glances were enough to show that the bond between them was healing. One early spring day, Daniel brought a young woman home. "Mother, this is Lauren, my colleague," he said. The young woman was gentle with bright, honest eyes. "I've heard a lot about you," she said kindly, "about your courage and how you protect what you love." After dinner, as they cleaned up, Lauren added softly, "I don't want to take anything away. I just want to build something together with him." Her words made Clara smile. For the first time in years, she felt a deep and genuine sense of peace. Time passed, and Daniel and Lauren became engaged. Their small wedding took place in the garden behind the house, simple and warm. Reggie stood beside Clara, smiling. When Daniel slipped the ring onto Lauren's finger, sunlight glimmered across the river, making the sky glow bright. "How do you feel?" Reggie asked. Clara answered softly, "At peace. At last, this home has laughter that's real." That night, Clara sat on the porch and opened the old notebook Jonathan had left behind. His handwriting was still clear. "Your strength will be the wall that protects us all," she whispered. "Do you see, Jonathan? I've kept everything, and I'm still myself." Daniel came outside and sat beside her. "Mother Lauren and I are moving to the city. I want to start a new life completely on my own." Clara nodded gently. "Go and remember this house will always be open to you." He took her hand, eyes glistening. "Thank you for not giving up on me." She smiled. A mother's heart never forgets, but it knows how to forgive. The river breeze drifted through the garden, carrying the scent of lavender through the air. Clara looked back at the glowing house and smiled faintly. Sometimes she whispered, "Protecting the past is how we save the future." Then she turned toward the camera Daniel had left behind, her voice calm and warm. "If you've ever been hurt," she said, "believe that standing up again is what makes us truly strong. Peace always finds those who have the courage to hold on to their worth."